Welcome. Before we call the meeting to order, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we call the meeting to order, I also wanted to recognize the efforts of our amazing city staff in Public Works Department for their snow removal. I've had numerous comments and compliments that people have reached out and said how wonderful, considering the volume and the amount of snow, how wonderfully clean our roads were. So I really want to pass along the compliments to our road crews, to Public Works, to all those in public safety that were out there, our police and fire protection, and numerous staff members here within the city. There was a lot of work, of course, that goes into those efforts. So I appreciate everybody's efforts, all of our city staff, for working extra hard during those times. So I want to take a moment to thank them for their efforts, and also appreciate what they do, and take a moment to thank the good Lord for watching over them while they work so hard, and pray for their safety while they keep us safe. So I wanted to recognize those comments. And then also, I believe that Councilman Schreiber and Mihalovich have a presentation this evening before we call the meeting to order.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and ladies and gentlemen, before we call the meeting to order, we would like to recognize Carlos Graham, and we would like to have a little presentation made to Councilman Graham. So, Councilman Mihalovich, would you please come up here? Carlos, in commemoration of the Orange Crush that took place last week, we wanted to give you a little gift, and Rick and I actually kicked in and purchased that for you, and so you can think of us every day this week when you drink these. So I'll never spend any more money on you, but this time we wanted you to have this. So thank you, and I believe, what was that score, 44-16, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay, order in the council chambers. I had nothing to do with this, let me just say it. I don't even get it, to be honest, so.
Clemson beat Alabama, Clemson blue and orange.
Oh.
And it wasn't even close, Madam Mayor.
I do get it, and thank you to my colleagues for giving me this crushed orange. Yes, we did get crushed by the orange, Clemson orange, so it was a good game, but also would like to say that congratulations to our very own Jeff City native, Hale Hinches, for catching a touchdown pass in his final game as a collegiate player. And we wish nothing but the best to Hale Hinches as he hopefully moves on to the next level and can represent Jefferson City very well. So even though Alabama did get beat, it was quite a showing for our very own Mr. Hale Hinches. And congratulations to Elias Catholic High School for putting out such a wonderful person such as he.
Well said.
Very well said. Okay, with that, let's call this meeting to order. So I'd like to call to order the special session of the Monday, January 14th, 2019 City Council meeting. Mrs. Donaldson, roll call, please.
Fitzwater.
Present.
Graham.
Present.
Hensley.
Here.
Hussey.
Here.
Kimna.
Here.
Mihalovich.
Present.
Prather. Schreiber.
Present.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
All right, item 3, we have city charter pending bills. So Counselor Molman will give us a brief overview of that, although he's done that before, so this will be a brief one. But I also want to take a moment to recognize our Charter Commission members, and we do have a couple of them here. We have Ms. McDowell and we have Mark here with us as well, and we appreciate the work that our Charter Commission has done. They've met for many, many months and brought forward those recommendations to the full council for us to consider. And we always appreciate the extra work that our citizens do for our committees, and appreciate both of you for being here this evening and the rest of our Charter Commission members as well. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to Councilor Molman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've gone through these a few times now, so I'm not going to belabor anything, but briefly, Bill 2018-94 contains general changes throughout the charter. Specifically, one item of interest relates to legislative procedures as contained in Section 3.11E. As I indicated last week, attached to Bill 1894 are two bill amendment sheets, 1A and 1B. They're at the very back of that particular bill. Bill amendment sheet 1A changes the Charter Review Committee's recommendation that a primary bill sponsor be reserved certain powers, such as the ability to put a bill on the formal calendar and then take it off the informal calendar. It replaces it with a system where each bill may have one or more sponsors, and each co-sponsor on a bill would have co-equal powers, and so any sponsor could put the bill on the informal calendar or take it off the informal calendar. Also, it provides that a bill could be removed off of the informal calendar not only by just a sponsor, but also by a majority vote of the council. That is a practice that's currently codified now. So this is memorialized. That would memorialize that current practice into the charter. Bill Amendment Sheet 1B takes a different tact. It strips out a lot of the more particular procedures as they relate to sponsors and an informal calendar, and only leaves really the kind of most essential legislative procedures that should be in the charter. Instead, replaces it with a direction that the council establish by ordinance each year additional rules and procedures for approval of bills and resolutions, and provides that those rules and procedures should be reviewed on an annual basis, and has a catch-all that if that review does not happen, the rules and procedures that govern the previous year would continue in effect. And so these are numbered 1A and 1B because they are mutually exclusive. They're kind of, do you want to take a tact of having particular direction on certain types of procedures laid out in the charter, or would you rather have the ability to have those types of issues be delegated to ordinance and reviewed on an annual basis? So if there's any interest in either Bill Amendment Sheet 1A or 1B, it should be one or the other should be passed if both can't really exist together. So that's all I have on 94. 95 deals with term limits for council members and the mayor. I won't go into that unless there's any questions. 96 relates to the city prosecutor. Of course, city prosecutor was forwarded to the city council from the Charter Review Advisory Committee as a recommendation that position be changed to an appointed position by a special board. This body voted in work session to keep the city prosecutor position as an elected position, but staff was given direction to prepare an ordinance which added removal provisions for the city prosecutor. So what this, what 96 does, it adds 2 additional subsections to Section 6.6, which provides reasons for removal of the city prosecutor from office by a 4/5 vote of the council, and then specifies that the process and procedures for removal of the city prosecutor can be set forth by ordinance. The reasons for removal of the city prosecutor largely mirror those reasons that are set forth by the for the office of mayor. And then finally, 97. Bill number 97 changes the section 12.1 of the charter, which is currently titled Personal Financial Conflicts, changes that name to Conflicts of Interest, and adds a provision that says that provides that that any city officer or employee who sits on a governing body of a nonprofit corporation or a political subdivision not vote or participate in the selecting or performance of a contract with the city, between the city and that nonprofit corporation or political subdivision. That is the exact same rule that we have for financial interest. This provision recognizes that there could be conflicts of interest even where there's not a direct financial implication, in situations where someone sits on the governing body of a nonprofit or another political subdivision. And so that applies both to elected officials and also city staff as well.
Thank you, Councilor Molman. And before we take these up, could you explain briefly the timeline and why we're having this discussion this evening, and what this means if any of these are brought forward?
Absolutely. So the council was originally advised that in order to get on to the April 2nd, 2019 general municipal election, we'd have to take up the, introduce the charter amendment bills in the first meeting of January, and then could pass, pass the charter bills if so desired at the second meeting. That is the general cycle for these types of bills as they relate to the general municipal election. However, this year, because the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday falls on January 21st, which is a Monday, the council meeting was pushed off until January 22nd, which is a Tuesday evening. And the deadline for ballot certifications is at January 22nd at 5 o'clock. And so the council meeting would, of course, be at 6 o'clock that evening, making that too late by an hour to turn in those ballot certifications. And so at the last meeting, it was requested that this session be called. And so that way the city council could consider whether or not it wanted to put any of these bills on the ballot for the April 2nd general municipal election in time for that deadline on January 22nd at 5 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open these up for discussion. Let's start with 2018-94. And we'll have Emily, Mrs. Donaldson, read that.
An ordinance of the City of Jefferson, Missouri approving an amended and restated charter of the City of Jefferson and submit such charter to a vote of the citizens of the City of Jefferson.
All right, and we've had the description by Councilor Molman. Is there any council discussion? Councilman Hussey?
Well, I believe there was some discussion at the last meeting to further discuss what I'll call the Amendment 1 or Amendment A, Amendment B, about some of that procedures, and maybe a desire from some of the council members to at least hear from some of the committee members, if they so desire, to speak to that. I know that that topic in particular took up a lot of debate during the committee meetings themselves, but I guess what we're kind of pondering, right, is moving forward with recommendations that include a lot of specificity with those legislative proceedings, or shifting where those are established by the council every year, the rules of this body, and leaving it a bit more vague in the charter. And so I know there might be some other things within that bill that are attracting council interest. I think the change about the city clerk living requirement, I know, has been a topic of discussion, and so that may be something that wants to get discussed. So I would encourage my colleagues here to certainly ask those questions and have that conversation.
Thank you, Councilman Hussey. And I did want to mention also and thank Councilman Hussey and Councilman Fitzwater, who were the two council liaisons to the Charter Review Commission. So is there any council questions on those amendments? Or you mentioned Charter Commission members, do we have any questions of the commission members that are here from council? Or questions among council? Councilman Mihalovich?
The one thing that I've appreciated through my 7 years of tenure here is the process that we go through. It's public, it's a defined process, it's deliberate, it has lots of opportunity for public input and debate. And somebody had asked me whether or not we've had plenty of openness with regard to these questions, and I think based on my reading is that we have had these public meetings with regard to the charter changes. We've had one work session, and we're bringing up nothing that was discussed outside of that work session. While we thought we might go on to other topics, every topic within here has been discussed at the work session, I believe. Is that correct, Steve?
I would say I think that the last bill about conflicts of interest was the only one that we may not have got into in great detail,
Okay.
but in conversations with Ryan and myself and Councilman Fitzwater on an email, we felt like it was not as controversial of a topic, but it sought to clarify some conflicts of interest. But you're correct in your about other topics such as parks, park commission, and the incompatible offices. And
The only thing I really have questions about specifically are 3.11, the rules related to sponsorship of bills, and I just don't see what we're actually trying to solve, what problem we're trying to solve with that regard. I see no need into changing that. As I understand, one proposal would be a rule-making kind of session at the very first of a new council. We would decide the rules for which we'll operate. I think that's kind of the way it's posed. And this would be the only rule I think we would deliberate on, as I would know. Am I wrong on that? And if we failed to discuss it during a new council formation, it would just revert back to whatever the charter was. So could you clarify how that rulemaking would proceed and how we would be deliberate about that process? I kind of fear that we'd just forget about it. So, and what other things would we cover?
Right. So the council procedures for legislation are pretty thoroughly addressed in Chapter 2 Administration Code. And so the thought would be is that there's an entire article that deals with how legislation is passed that goes into a lot more detail on procedures. And so the thought would be is that probably after elections, after the April elections, that we would have an annual work session to discuss any changes in the procedure. And you see this with the General Assembly. Every single year they pass rules that govern how procedure is going to work, and I think every single year they are basically the same, but there's nuances from time to time. And so that this procedure could act like that. It would take that would be commanded in the charter to undertake that review. And so it would take, just discipline and recognition of what the charter requires to make sure that happens on an annual basis. But I would say what you're reviewing every single year is the entire procedure for how a bill becomes an ordinance. And I would expect that there would not be a lot of great variation on a year-to-year basis, but it also gives the council a regular opportunity to think about how it conducts its business, and is there a better way to do things? It allows you to address situations as they come up. Well, that was kind of a weird thing that happened last September. Let's see if we can come up with a better rule. That would be kind of the purpose, is to just make a conscious effort to review the rules every single year and decide, is this how we want to conduct our business this year? Looking at the crystal ball a little bit, I would say that there's probably would be a lot of years where the decision was no recommended changes.
Councilman Mahalovich?
Seems like that the model of the General Assembly and Congress may not fit here, and maybe not even good for this body. I don't know.
Yeah.
The other question that I'll ask for the colleague that's not here is he had a concern whether or not, if he had a finance bill, could that be interrupted in a way that we couldn't have passed his finance bill by the time we would be needing to, because of the way the bill sponsorship worked? Would you foresee unintended consequences? And I think that's the general question.
Right. Councilperson Prather's concern, I think, is a good one. A situation where under the recommended procedures, where the primary bill sponsor has kind of super control over a bill, and is the only person that can put it on the informal calendar, is the only person that can take it off the informal calendar, could present a situation where the bill sponsor, for whatever reason, couldn't attend a meeting where the budget bill has to be pulled off and passed. That would create a procedural hardship, and I think his point is well taken, and probably deserves some consideration on softening that blow.
Councilman Mahalovich?
I'm interested in other people's thoughts on this, but I think I've got my questions answered. Thank you very much.
Councilman Hensley?
Thank you. Yeah, and picking up right where that left off, it's my recollection that the situation where a bill is on the informal calendar, and then for unforeseen circumstances the sponsor is unavailable to attend the meeting where it would expire, that was sort of the driving force behind looking into this change. And I can't remember if that arose at the review commission meetings or if that arose here, but wherever it arose, that seemed to be the driver of this. I personally am in favor of the primary sponsor being able to keep control of the bill. I think, though, that if the primary sponsor had the option to assign a proxy in that sort of situation, if the control was left to the primary bill sponsor, if a situation like that arose, where they couldn't attend, but they could inform the clerk and whoever might be receiving their proxy, a co-sponsor, that they wouldn't be able to attend, but that the co-sponsor had their power to pull it off and bring it up for debate. I think that might be about where I'd be comfortable with this. I also think that this is an awfully in the weeds item to be in essentially our Constitution. The option B, what's that? Oh, I thought someone said something. The option B about giving us an annual look at the at the rules is also attractive. So a few different thoughts on this topic, but so I might be an item B supporter, but then if we go forward with item B, moving to this sort of proxy system potentially for avoiding that doomsday scenario where something is inextricably left on the informal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Hussey?
Well, I just have a quick question for Mr. Molman. If we chose to not make any changes to section 3.11, what's your take on how it's written and what concerns or flags did you see that you thought needed some addressing?
Right. So I've given this some thought, and the primary concern is contained in 311E3, and it's the language at the very end of 3 that reads that a bill thereafter may be called up only by the primary bill sponsor at any time when otherwise in order. And those additions of by only the primary bill sponsor is the source of, I think, the problem that Councilman Prather has expressed. And I think you could probably address that. I haven't thought of a proxy system. The only problem with a proxy system is then you have to establish your procedure of establishing a proxy. And I wonder if you might be able to accomplish a similar goal by leaving that language by only the primary bill sponsor or a majority vote of the council. So if a majority vote of the council votes to bring something off of the informal calendar, then that could address the doomsday situation where a primary bill sponsor isn't available to call it off. Now that is essentially what we do now. That is in the city code. But it's what I told the Charter Review Committee is when you talk about things such as the informal calendar and bill sponsors in the charter, then you need to completely flesh out that idea. And so that's why these things are even being talked about, because the charter as it currently constitutes talks about things like sponsors and the informal calendar, but is kind of incomplete on how you address everything. So that's a long way to get to a very simple question.
I appreciate
think you
that.
could add some protections by just codifying into the charter what we currently do with a fairly simple amendment.
Yeah, I think that what was a driving force on this being discussed at the charter committee level was that we had these some charter amendments on the council agenda a year ago. And I believe that they were a mixture of myself and Councilman Wiseman as being the sponsors of them. And we placed everything on the informal, including the fire protection district one. And then Councilman Mihalovich made a motion to pull off the informal calendar. What's that? The pension. And the council did that and took action and put it on the ballot, which is fine. But it caused some attention to be brought to it by members of the committee, especially those in the committee who had served in the council previously, that said, well, wait a minute, back when we served on the council, that was not a practice that was permitted, and so then attention was paid to it. So our actions sort of drew some attention to it. I'm not certain that Mr. Hartsfield and others on the committee necessarily started with the intent of looking directly at this section, but certainly that drew attention to it and led to a lot of debate and some different opinions on what actions could be taken. And so I guess I would almost wonder, like, if the opinion of legal counsel is that a majority vote of the council can already pull something off the informal calendar, then the decision point comes, do you want to prohibit that activity, or do you want to push the determinations on these sorts of rules and procedures to an ordinance and an annual review and place that description elsewhere and not have it be codified within the charter. Like, there's like two ways to go, or we just don't make any of the changes that are prescribed in here, not the amendments, but even just the changes that are listed here for section 311 subsection E, and just leave it as is, as the charter currently states today, how we govern, if there's an understanding that council can take something off the informal calendar, even if that goes against the wishes of the bill sponsor. I would say that I guess I have a little concern about the primary bill sponsor sometimes, in the sense that you're the primary bill sponsor a lot of times on our council activities because you hold a chair of a committee, or you serve as the liaison to that particular board and commission. And so if we chose to go that path, we may need to give some thought to, do we assign ourselves as primary bill sponsors in a different manner? I think that's just a practice that's handled by staff to go that route. But in reality, staff may want to be a bit more cautious about just assuming that it's the chair of the committee at times, right? Maybe not. You could have a situation where the chair of the committee could be a 4-1 vote. They're the one in committee. Because they're the chair, they're named primary bill sponsor, and they place on the informal against the, and leave it there to die. So I hope some context there. I tend to lean towards Amendment B initially, to say rules and procedures on an annual basis. We can further define there, or I would default almost to just leaving the charter as is, as it stands today.
All right, thank you, Councilman Hussey. And I would want to give an opportunity, the council, at our council meetings, has an opportunity to hear from the public if there's any comments before the vote is made. So I want to open that up if there's anyone that would want to speak. Looks like we do have, okay, would you like to come forward and you can give us your name and give us your comment about this one or any of the four bills?
Where are the rest of the people of Jefferson City? I'm the only citizen here. What's going on? I heard this on TV about term limits last week, and I moved down here from Illinois for term limits that you guys have it, and Jefferson City has it. Here's my little speech here. My name is Bill Gannett. I'm a new resident of Missouri and to Jefferson City. I was very happy to find out Missouri has term limits when I moved here. I grew up in Illinois, unfortunately the land of corruption. Politicians are in office for 12, 15, 20, 30 plus years, and even felons can run for office in Cook County. For democracy to work properly, it needs to have fresh ideas and a constant flow of new blood. I worked with Governor Rauner on collecting signatures for term limits in Illinois and personally tried to pass a referendum in my hometown of Arlington Heights, which I made the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The average politician was 20 years in office. It just does not work. My referendum failed due to a technicality on the wording, and the people were not even given the chance to vote on it. About 95% of the voters signed the petition to at least get it on the ballot. And I had over 4,000 signatures that I personally collected myself. It's pretty obvious that our economy is all messed up due to lifelong senators in Washington. Can you imagine having any president 12 years or longer, or just constantly coming back? Please don't destroy this beautiful little town and vote no to any changes in our term limits. So I don't know if you guys are going to vote individually on it, or you pack it all together and it's one vote for each person, or how do you do that here? Like with the term limits as part of this thing, do you vote on that individually, or is it all in one big packet and you vote yes or no from each person.
We have 4 bills before us, and the one, item B on term limits, the council will take that up and either vote yes or no. If they vote yes, it will go on the ballot in April, so the voters
Okay.
will make the decision on all of these.
So when are they individually going to vote
Yes.
on that? Well, pardon? Oh, tonight? Okay. 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 Well, I just don't want to pack up and move back somewhere else because you guys got a great town here, I'm telling you. This is a great little town. And to change things, you got to have new blood. And I like what's happening here in town with the new, taking that pathway across the river and all that stuff. I don't want that stuff to end. It's not a lifelong job being in politics. It's part-time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. It is a great town.
Yeah.
I do have a question, so we get it correct in the record. What is the spelling of your last name?
Gnech, Bill.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to also open it up for public comments. Do either of our Charter Commission members have anything they'd like to add on this or any of the other bills, or? Okay. Well, certainly we'll leave it open if council has questions for you as well, so. Okay, and any further deliberation on item A? Yes.
I'm terribly sorry. You read things over and over again, and each time you read it, you find something. I would like to call your attention to Bill Amendment Sheet 1B, particularly item E2. The bold and highlighted language still contains a vestige of the primary or the primary bill sponsor language, where it says it should be introduced unless suspension of this rule is requested by the primary bill sponsor. Absent the suspension of this rule, where it says primary bill sponsor, that keeps kind of a superpower for a primary bill sponsor, which is really trying to eliminate this bill amendment sheet. So I would suggest that where it says by the primary bill sponsor be changed to by a member or by a council member. So my apologies for missing that in drafting this, but to keep the primary bill sponsor language kind of it kind of counters what we were trying to do in this bill amendment sheet. So if this were to be taken up, I would suggest that change be made if so desired.
And Councilor Molman, since we have Amendment A and B, how would be the best way for us to take those up?
Well, there would need to be a motion. So if there's a motion to amend the bill, then there would be a motion to either take up A or B.
A or B separately, or both together?
It would be A or B separately.
Okay. Councilman Hussey?
Well, for the sake of Councilman Fitzwater, you looking at me, did you have something to say? I'm sorry if I cut you off there. For the sake of at least putting something forward, I guess I would make a motion to adopt Amendment Sheet 1B with the change as declared by Councilman or Councilor Molman in E2 there, about primary bill sponsor reading as by a council member, correct?
Okay, we have a motion to take up Amendment 1B.
Second.
We have a second. And do we need to vote to approve the amendment, or did we do that at the last meeting, or to take up the bill as amended?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So at this time, we'll just discuss the amendment then for 1B. Councilman Mahalovich?
Okay, can you direct me back to, I found this, Bill Amendment Sheet 1B, what section?
E2.
E2, okay, and then,
The highlighted language.
yes?
It states that introduced unless suspension of this rule is requested by the primary bill sponsor. Councilman Hussey's motion includes amending the words "the primary bill sponsor" with "a council member." So that would specify that any council member can make a request for suspension of the rules.
which I would clarify is how we do it right now. Any of us make that request all the time.
It's usually the bill sponsor, but any council member could make the request.
So just so I'm clear, and everyone else, and maybe I'm the only one, so what we're taking up now is item 1B to make the change of a council member, removing primary bill sponsor to a council member.
My motion was to take up the entire amendment, just to clarify that it needed to change out section 2 to read correctly,
Okay,
not to take up that small 3-word change particular, but we were taking up the
Okay.
entire amendment.
okay, the entire amendment, including the change. Any further discussion? Councilman Fitzwater and then Ann Mahalovich.
There seems to have been a lot of discussion tonight. I mean, I think it is still clear as mud in what the intention, I appreciate the councilman's comments that we're really codifying what we already do. I just am concerned how we would communicate this to voters if this was on a ballot. I'm just not comfortable with this section with all the debate tonight and discussion, so I'm probably going to be a no on this piece of it.
Councilman Mahalovich? Okay. Okay. Any further deliberation? Councilman Hussey?
I guess I would just counter that if you're making the case to the public. My thought is what this does is that it puts it on the council on an annual basis to establish the rules and procedures of how they're going to function. It's clarifying some of that. I guess that's simply how I would explain what this particular section does. I think it's the kind of section that internally for us, we're familiar with and we're close to it, and maybe there's some disagreement or debate amongst ourselves as to what's the best way to go about this. My guess is that for our citizens in the community that would be going to the polls, they might just see this as, okay, they're just establishing rules and procedures, and seems like a smart thing to do. That certainly makes sense. Now, if we think that we shouldn't necessarily do that, or if we want greater specificity in the charter about how that happens, then that's certainly a strong stance and a stance that someone could arrive at as well, and it is completely rational in my opinion. But
Okay, any further questions or deliberation? Okay, so hearing none, we will take up 2018-94 Amendment 1B. Councilman Wiseman?
Are we talking about right now, like what we're gonna put in the whole package? I know the last meeting we talked about we're not gonna revisit this again. Are we talking about this is what is gonna be in the final package and we're not gonna revisit this again afterwards? Or are we just kind of parceling this out tonight and trying to figure out what's gonna be on the ballot? I'm just not sure exactly where we're headed.
I think tonight the decision would be made of whether to put this on the ballot, so a yes vote would move it forward for the April ballot.
at this point, a yes vote just adds Amendment 1B to Bill 94. It swaps out the language of Section 311. A no vote could mean that you're comfortable with the language that's presented currently in Bill 94, or that you desire to see different language in that particular section. But the desire would be to figure out how we want Section 311 to read, if we want changes to that section, and make that determination tonight so that we can ideally move some things to the voters tonight.
So I guess I'm misunderstanding it too then, so I apologize for my, I'm getting confused too now. Councilwoman Ward?
Regarding this amendment that we're voting on, I need some clarification regarding our current procedure on suspending the rules, because I know I have been the primary sponsor for ordinances before where I've been advised by the city council counselor regarding, it had, I was the one that had to do it since I was the sponsor. But I'm hearing that that's not the case, how we... I'm sorry, before we
that's
vote,
all right.
I think we
No,
just
I-
need to be clear on
No,
how
absolutely.
we
I wanna give you-
currently are doing it. I mean, to me, it seems like it is working. And I'd hate to muddy up a ballot issue if...
Pardon me, please bear with me. Section 2-202, City Code, titled Suspension, Amendment, etc. of Rules, Introduction of New Rules, states, a single council person may request the temporary suspension of any rule. Upon such request, the mayor shall ask for any objections from the council. Thereafter, the rule shall be temporarily suspended unless at least 2 members voice objection. No rule required by the charter or state law shall be suspended. So it's any council person. And I think there's a difference between what's required or allowed under rule and what the common practice is. The common practice is that the bill sponsor requests the suspension of the rules. And I think that's probably what happens 99% of the time. But the code itself does allow for any council person to request a suspension of the rules.
So if that's currently in our code and how we are practicing, why are we addressing it in the charter?
Right. So what you find is in the charter are inferences and references to procedures that are codified in the code. So you have so currently the charter refers to sponsors, and it gives sponsors certain powers, but it never establishes who can be a sponsor, how many sponsors a bill can have, what those sponsors' other powers may be. And so the thought is that if the charter is going to talk about powers of sponsors, then you need to really define how sponsors are established. You need to set up the entire system as opposed to just having a single reference to a sponsor, because you essentially have a charter power that is controlled and defined by the city code, where the relationship between those should be flipped. You should have charter provisions that then control and govern how the code is interpreted. And so that was the thought, is that there's kind of these just weird instances where they talk about things that happen but don't establish the steps to get to those actions. And specifically, sponsorship and informal calendar are the two things that are contemplated in the charter but aren't completely fleshed out. And so the changes to 311 attempt to do that.
Thank you very much.
Any further deliberation? And Councilwoman Wiseman, was your question answered also? Okay. Any further questions? Okay, roll call, please.
Fitzwater,
No.
Graham,
No.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Kimna,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
No.
Prather, Schreiber,
No.
Ward,
Aye.
Wiseman,
Aye.
ayes have it. 5-4.
5-4, so it passes?
The amendment,
It's
the
gonna be 5-5.
amendment has passed with the change in 311E2.
All right, so the amendment itself has passed. So now we're still on the bill 2018-94 with the amendment that just passed, correct?
Correct, the bill stands.
Okay, so, taking that up, any further deliberation? Councilman, was it
I know-
Hussey or who's?
Well, I know there was some conversation about city clerk and that change in there. I want to make sure that those that wanted to discuss that, be sure to do so, please. So, because the bill as it reads right now, and I'm trying to find my page that I should be looking at, but it does make a change to those requirements, correct, Councilor Molman?
Correct. It gives a 6-month grace period for someone who is accepting the job of city clerk to move into the city after appointment, and then based on direction from this body, that requirement is also imposed on the city administrator and the city councilor. So each of those would have 6 months after appointment to establish residency inside the city.
Further comments? Councilman Mahalovich?
I'm going to change our attention to a few, the 5.1D regarding city councilor, strike that, city administrator. I just can see no circumstance where our city administrator should be living anywhere other than the city limits of Jefferson. Even a high bar of 2/3, am I wrong? That we can waive that?
Yeah, there's a waiver clause upon a supermajority of 2/3.
Just says, I think that sends the wrong message, and I would not, under any circumstances, understand why we would want to do that, and I just have an issue with that particular element. Then 6.5, I see I have a note on 6.5. I just don't, I understand the confusion sometimes of counselor versus councilman, but the attorney or a counselor just doesn't seem big enough to warrant a charter change, in my opinion, on that. I am not putting forward an amendment to change it, however. I guess if I'm going to speak, I ought to, if I feel strongly about it, I ought to offer amendment. And I had one other one that I'm going to look at. I can't find it right now in my note. Oh, I'm sorry to skip back. 5.2. I think that was a note to myself to look that over a little closer. I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I'll reread this to myself, but I'm not too sure how that changes the duties and powers of the city, the duties and powers of the city administrator. We're delegating the city administrator? I just need to reread that.
I don't think that does. I think that just, it makes that language gender neutral, if I'm correct. Instead of saying city affairs placed in his charge,
I think it accomplishes two goals: gender neutralization, and then also it replaces what could be considered a term of art, or perhaps even archaic language placed in his charge, with a little bit more direct language, that it's all city affairs delegated to the city administrator. That's a little bit more, it's a little more direct, a little less poetic. It's, both of those are, I think, rightly considered clarifications as opposed to changes in the power.
Further questions, comments? Councilman Fitzwater?
Councilman raised the issue. I tried to focus on two things last time when I discussed. One was the city clerk's position. I'm still not comfortable with that 6 month. I guess I would defer to the wishes of the group, but I'm still not comfortable with that piece. The other comment that I raised was I really wasn't focused so much on the calendar as doing this right. There seems to be a lot of confusion. It seems to me if we're going to change our charter, it's a 9-0 tonight because we only have 9 of us, or a 10-0 or an 8-1. 5-4 to change our living document just seems like a pretty close vote on a very important issue. And we had folks that spent a lot of time. They brought some ideas to us. It just, this section of it just doesn't seem like it's gelling to the point where we've got a solid proposal that we could take out to the voters and say, this is what we as city council think needs to be done with our living document. Now, if it passes, I'll be the cheerleader out there supporting it. But right now, this section doesn't feel comfortable, and I don't feel comfortable taking it to the voters without a feeling that we as a group agree on these changes. So yes, I did comment the city clerk position. I'm still not comfortable with it, but if that was the only piece and the group said this is the way we want to go, yeah, I'd suck it up and go with it. But the whole discussion on this section, I mean, we spent an hour on this piece and we still come up with a 5-4 vote, and I know we haven't voted on this piece of it, but it just doesn't feel right yet.
Councilwoman Wiseman?
Yes, thank you. There was, I think Councilman Hussey indicated that earlier, I think you indicated earlier we could do something by ordinance change, and like our procedure by ordinance change instead of by charter change. Did I hear you correctly?
What I was referring to was that Amendment 1B that was approved that spells out in 3.11E subsection 3 that the council shall by ordinance establish additional rules and procedures for the approval of bills and resolutions. So my point there was that instead of codifying all of that within the charter, it allows every council every year to make a determination if they want to handle some of these procedures differently. So in practice, I would assume that a council could make modifications to primary bill sponsor one year and change those rules if that council so deemed. It could handle the informal calendar differently and those sorts of things, as opposed to, and so my thought was you could go that path of putting that language aside in rules and procedures that's done by ordinance every year. You could place that language in a stricter sense in the charter, or you could leave the charter as is and not amend that section. And the assumption would be that we continue to function as we do today. But it seemed as though there was some disagreement by past council members that the actions we took this past spring, last spring, whether or not those were actually permissible and if that was the past practice.
Well, to Councilman Fitzwater's point, I was wondering if we tried some of this out with ordinance and then later codified it, if that's a possibility. I could just be completely off here. But if that's something that would make us a little bit more comfortable with some of these changes. I know some of them are gender changes, and that wouldn't be appropriate for ordinance, but some of the procedural changes, especially if we have any other procedures that are in ordinance and not in charter changes.
I would imagine that you're most likely any ordinance change to rules and procedures would be confined to the things that are discussed in section 311 subsection E. I mean, like, it wouldn't necessarily touch on some of the other things that are within this broader bill this evening, such as clerk residency and those things. Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
Since Councilman Mahalovich brought it up about the city administrator's residency requirement, just for clarity's sake, what is the current requirement? How is that?
It's
6 months, no allowance by a council to extend that through a vote.
There's, the language, the language is extended or waived. The second part of that, waived, is the problem.
And that is contained within, not the charter, but not.
Well, I think there's been some great discussion and a lot of good questions, and I would somewhat echo what Councilman Fitzwater said, and I was going to say this anyway, that had it been a 5-5 vote, that I would have voted no, absent Councilman Prather, so none of these will have a 5-5. But I do agree that if it's a 5-4, to put anything forward to the voters, that preferably having more council confidence and support would be the better way to do that. And frankly, I'm not seeing that tonight, and I think that shows that perhaps there are there's just not the confidence at council level to move these forward. And so my concern would be that the voters would likely react in the same manner. So with that being said, I won't have a chance to vote on that tonight, but do want to make it known what my vote would be if I did have to break a tie. Any further discussion before we take up 2018-94? Okay, I want to make sure everybody's had their chance. So are we ready for a roll call? Okay, Mrs. Donaldson, roll call, please.
Graham,
No.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey.
Aye.
Kimna,
Aye.
Mahalovich. Prather, Schreiber,
No.
Ward,
Aye.
Wiseman,
Aye.
Fitzwater.
No.
Ayes have it, 5-4.
5-4, so bill passes.
Let me step in here.
Okay.
Ordinances have to be approved by 6 members. So regardless of attendance, charter requires 6 members to approve an ordinance. So the bill fails.
Was that
Councilman Hussey?
what was the vote?
5 ayes, 4
Was it?
noes.
I'm trying to figure out, okay, so
The way I read it, it's 5 yeses, 4 noes, 1 absent. But the charter is quite elegant in this provision. It's 6. Okay.
Okay. So, I'll take back what I said, bill fails. Okay. Okay, and now on to 2018-95.
An ordinance of the City of Jefferson, Missouri submitting an amendment to the Charter of the City of Jefferson relating to term limits on the offices of council member and mayor to a vote of the citizens of the City of Jefferson.
Okay, and I'll entertain council questions and deliberation. I'll start by saying, even though I know I won't get a vote on it, that I am fine with the current term limits at the local level. Any deliberation? Council questions? Councilman Hussey?
I guess I would just seek to clarify that this does not do away with term limits. It does not have a lifetime term limit. What it does is that it forces that break in service after you served 4 consecutive terms on the council or 2 consecutive terms on mayor, that you must take a term off, right? So you could serve 8 on the council, you have to take 2 off, and then you'd have the opportunity to run once more. It seems that to be a compromised position for a lot that still desire to see some sort of forced turnover, but at the same time, not apply maybe a lifetime limit to somebody's service. Minimum age to run for city council in the city of Jefferson is 21 years of age, meaning somebody could be termed out for life right now at age 29. I guess that seems like a very stringent standard, especially if somebody to return 20 years later at age 49 and desire to run again. It's not as though we have people lining up in droves to run for city council. And so it might give us an opportunity for somebody to come back later in life and have an opportunity to serve once more. If the desire to have that be a larger break, I think that's certainly something to entertain. I know that's been discussed. Was a 2-year break for a council member sufficient? Should it be 4? Should it be longer? That'd be great, to have that conversation, and I wouldn't be opposed to extending that time period. But a lifetime limit for an office like city council in a community of our size can seem like a pretty high bar. I think we still achieve a lot of what's desired through term limits through a forced break, basically, as defined in this bill.
Further comments, Councilman Fitzwater?
I would echo some of those comments, and I appreciate the comment from the gentleman that spoke earlier. I would say that we do have term limits in our state legislature as well, and it has proved to be positive and negative. I mean, there are good aspects of term limits. There are bad aspects of term limits. One of the bad aspects is the institutional knowledge of the House and Senate, in the case of the state legislature, is very limited, and there was a lot of turnover this year because of resignations and just term limits kicking in. Little less impact city council level because we aren't lobbied by lobbyists, so there's a little bit more direct relationship working with the citizens, and we don't have the impact that we have under the dome. I think the piece that we don't have to state level is, as Councilman Hussey indicated, the break in service and then the opportunity to come back. So I think that's a little different. I don't see this provision, I don't see a lot of places where folks are going to come back after that break. It does give an opportunity, as you indicated, if someone was to run for a term and say, yeah, this is just not really what I thought it was, have where we couldn't find someone in a previous council member be able to run to bring that institutional knowledge back. So I think term limits have done some positive things at the state level, have done some positive things here. I think there are some negatives, and I think the break in service is that differing part, and maybe why this makes sense. I still think at some point that folks ought to cycle through, have the privilege and opportunity to serve here, and then move on so that other folks have that privilege and service.
Thank you. Any further council questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll take up Bill 2018-95. Roll call, please.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Kimna,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather, Schreiber,
Aye.
Ward,
Aye.
Wiseman,
Aye.
Fitzwater,
Aye.
Graham,
Nay.
Bill passes. 2018-96.
An ordinance of the City of Jefferson, Missouri, submitting an amendment to the Charter of the City of Jefferson relating to the office of City Prosecutor to a vote of the citizens of the City of Jefferson.
Any council deliberation? Councilman Mahalovich?
I have questions with regard to this one. And a reminder to anybody that these are all going in front of the votes of the public in April, so our decision just moves it forward. But City Prosecutor, should the City Prosecutor in any way, and judge as far as that's concerned, I think I know the answer to this, lose their license to practice, will they no longer, would they no longer be able to be a City Prosecutor or judge?
That's a very interesting question. I hope one that we would never have to answer. Hypothetically, if someone were serving as city prosecutor, and this really doesn't apply to judge because there's an independent statewide commission that
Okay.
governs
Take that one
resignations
off the
and
table.
discipline of judges. If they were a city prosecutor who lost their law license, they would not be able to serve as city prosecutor because that would be the illegal practice of law. And so in that situation, you would hope that they would resign because they could not do the job. The concern, though, would be that they would not resign and that the city would maybe have to bring a lawsuit to have them forfeit the office. That action is called quo warranto, and that is the only way you can remove a officer from office. And so, in your hypothetical situation, it would likely take a lawsuit to remove the city prosecutor if in the event they lost their law license and they didn't want to resign. In the interim time that it would take to prosecute a quo warranto lawsuit, arguably that city prosecutor would be entitled to compensation for service as city prosecutor, even though they could not do it. The compensation is tied to the office, not to the act. And so you may have a situation if someone just, hey, I'm going to fund my defense of this lawsuit with the city's prosecutor salary. I could see a situation where that could happen. Now, I'm not saying that is the end-all be-all opinion, and we would fight to protect the city's interests in every single way in that particular interest, but that could be an argument that would be levied, is that as long as someone occupies that office, whether or not they're legally entitled to act in that office, they're still the office holder and entitled to the compensation. It presents a really thorny legal issue that could probably only be rectified through litigation.
Councilman Mahalovich?
And so the language that I see here remedies that issue. Is that correct?
Yes.
Just one word, yes?
Well, it would give the city council the ability to address the situation that the license that's been lost, the officer is no longer qualified for the office, and give the council the opportunity to vote upon a supermajority to remove that person from office. So it would present the opportunity to address it.
Further council questions, discussion? Okay, seeing none, roll call, please.
Hussey,
Aye.
Kimna,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather, Schreiber. Ward.
Aye.
Wiseman,
Aye.
Fitzwater,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Hensley.
Aye.
Bill passes. 2018-97.
An ordinance of the City of Jefferson, Missouri submitting an amendment to the Charter of the City of Jefferson relating to conflicts of interest to a vote of the citizens of the City of Jefferson.
Council deliberation, questions? Okay, with that, I guess seeing none. Or did you have one, or? No? Okay. Roll call, please.
Kimna,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather, Schreiber. Ward.
Aye.
Wiseman.
Aye.
Fitzwater,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Hensley,
Aye.
Hussey.
Aye.
Bill passes. Okay, so with that, it looks like, in summary, that the first charter change will not be on the ballot, but item B, C, and D, those three proposed charter changes will be on the April 2nd ballot. So the voters will have the opportunity to cast their vote on that. Councilman Hussey?
Just a chance at a little persuasion here, because we honed in on a lot of things on Bill 94 that generate some attention, but there's a lot in that bill that is really just some cleanup language. And I know that's not necessarily a sense of urgency, but staff and the committee put a lot of work into some of that, and I don't know if there's going to be a desire to revisit the procedures and the clerk requirement and these things in the future. One possibility here could be to reconsider 94 and strip out 311 changes, the 3.8, which is the city clerk change, and I believe the 5.1D, which is the city administrator change, which tended to attract some more attention, but leave in the language that talks, that switches councilman to council member. The language that clarifies some of the cleanup or removes some of the dates and these sorts of things. And if there's not a desire to do that, I'm on the wrong side of that vote to reconsider that. But I certainly want to just throw that whole bill out and all of that body of work out. And if that desire is to not put something on the April ballot, I would urge, there's not going to be an August election this year, right? We're in an odd number year. We'd have to call it ourselves. There's not going to be a November election unless we call it ourselves, so, right? Unless I'm wrong about another political subdivision calling it an election. I mean, those are our opportunities, but I don't think we should call an August or November election solely for some charter changes like this. We're looking at next April as our next opportunity again. And so I would just
Councilman-
ask that either give some thought or let's make a commitment to at least take up those things in there at some point that really aren't all that controversial, but it was a chance by staff and the committee to go through and just try to update and clean up the document a little bit. And I
Looking
don't
back,
want
it
to
might
lose
have
all
been
that.
good to have that separate somewhat from some of those others. To your point, I think, Councilman Hesse. Councilman Mahalovich?
Regarding that, we just noted that now. We have the opportunity to bring that bill back forward, but it's at the next meeting. I don't see any way, parliamentary order-wise, we can address this, because maybe I'm wrong, but
Is it possible that a council member could make a motion for those minor changes that you listed? And if there was a second, can they take that up, since it is different from the original bill? If they, can they make a motion in writing?
Well, sorry. So first of all, there would have to be a vote to reconsider in order to amend it in any way. So that would be the first step. And I'm double checking here. Section 2-236, when a bill is put upon its final passage and fails to pass, a motion may be made to reconsider the vote by which it was defeated not later than the next regular council meeting. The motion may be made by a member who voted on the prevailing side. The vote on such motion to reconsider shall be immediately taken and the subject finally disposed of before the council proceeds to any other business. There's a deadline. I don't think there is a requirement that it last until the next, I believe that the motion could be taken up this evening.
Councilman?
Didn't that happen to us a few weeks ago when we took up the Sherman Hollow issue? Then we had to wait till the next council meeting to bring that back up?
We had to wait till the next council meeting because state law required a public hearing, and so it was the next available opportunity after public hearing.
Oh, so that required a public hearing.
It required under state law.
But the motion to reconsider, I think had to be done by the next meeting. It could not be done any later than the next meeting. So it's the inverse of what you were saying. Essentially, we could take the motion to reconsider this evening.
Any time between now and close of business at the next meeting.
And it would be required to be made by any who voted in the, or negative, affirmative. wait. In the the no
On the
votes.
side which
Correct.
prevailed.
The no votes.
Correct.
On the side which prevailed.
The prevailing side, which was the no votes.
Correct.
Okay. Do you need to list who those were and if any of them, because it would be up to those to make the motion. So to be clear, the following council members could make a motion to reconsider, which would be, you want to read off
Those who voted no.
those? Right.
Fitzwater, Graham, Mahalovich, Schreiber.
What would be these? Wait a minute.
It didn't pass because we didn't have 6 votes.
Oh, right. Okay. That's right. So if any of those council members would want to bring up a motion to reconsider. All right. Seeing none? Or- Pardon me? Yes, Councilwoman Ward?
Coming from a female council member's standpoint, I would like to see the technical cleanup because it is, everyone here is referred to a councilman. And there's 2 of us that are not. So I just think, just clean up, because it is kind of confusing when you are out in the public too, you know, because the common and general usage is councilman, and I catch myself saying councilman, I mean woman. And, I mean, I don't care either way what people refer to me as, but it's just kind of confusing. And I've actually tried to start using council member more, even though it isn't a charter term, but it's more inclusive. So that's just my comment to anyone who doesn't see it from the other side of the table.
So of the names that you mentioned that are eligible to bring it up, if there was a desire, Councilor Molman, how simple would that be to just amend it for that purpose of changing the, making those cleanup?
I actually think that the section 311E, I believe that section 311E is already without any references to council men, and so gender neutralization of that particular subsection is not necessary. So there could be an amendment to remove any amendments to section 3.11E, and it would be not necessary to further address it to keep with the gender neutralization goals of the rest of the bill. It's quite fortuitous.
What'd you say at the end?
It's lucky.
What?
It's lucky that you wouldn't have to do anything to the bill, to the existing language.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. So, Councilman Hussey?
I mean, if there's not a desire, there's not a desire. If there's a desire to reconsider and make some of these changes, I mean, we could make the motion, take a quick 5-minute recess just to get clarity on what we're doing on stripping out some of those things. But if that feels a little too muddled and not quite as smooth as some would like, that's certainly fine. I just want to make sure that there's a lot of work in that particular bill, and that we take it up at some point. And maybe there's not even a desire to do that. There's a lot of cleanup in that particular bill.
So to be clear, that what you're talking about is only the gender neutral terminology.
There's more in that bill besides the general neutral language that
And some of the
is
things
just
like that you
cleanup.
mentioned
It's
with
just changing
the updating.
There's something about determining when it refers to a period of time for an activity. I want to say redefining business days, but there was some clarifying language on that particular stuff, and so.
Okay. Okay, well, that would depend on the 4, so at this time, let's see if there is any desire to make a motion. I don't think I see any, so I just want to make sure I don't miss anyone. Okay, so seeing none, it looks like the 3 items will be on the April 2nd ballot. Any further comments? So I will announce, or any new business? Just an announcement that, for one, that filing closes tomorrow, Tuesday, January 15th, for mayor and 5 city council seats. And reminder, there's no meeting on Monday, January 21st, in observance of Martin Luther King holiday, that the next regular council meeting will be Tuesday, January 22nd. Oh, and judge and prosecutor, thank you for the, on the filing that closes tomorrow. Thank you. All right, anything else before we adjourn? Motion to adjourn. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.